Evening, folks. My name is Steve Blender. I am Vice President of the Watertown Council, and unfortunately, our council president has been called back to work. So I will be officiating or trying to. So the first order of business on the agenda is to stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and please be seated. So this evening, our meeting is a discussion and action with our legislative leaders. And this evening, besides myself being present, we have Councilwoman Terry Cronin, we have Councilman Brent Eckert, and Councilman Joseph DePasquale. So I am pretty much going to turn this over to the manager, since she has provided us this list of items. And I like how you put education at the top of the list, because I feel that is a very big priority. So Kate, the floor is yours.
So, if the council has something that they want to break in with, please just let me know, because I put together a list just for discussion. Now, these are my recommendations based on my discussions with staff. So these are not recommendations of the council as a body, just to make that clear. But just some things we've discussed previously and some things that are new. The first section, again, these are in no particular order of importance as far as I'm concerned, but the first section was on education. One thing that we talked about, I think every year that we've had this, is the need for a stable and predictable funding formula. I think there's been a lot of questions in the past about, will it change? Will it not change? What's going to happen? And then this year, the question that I would have is the Senate going to introduce its own funding formula this year? Because I know that there was a big study that was performed and a lot of recommendations that came out of the Senate last year. I know the governor has proposed his own school funding formula applications, and I think it'll just be really important for the legislators to let us know as the process continues if there's going to be any reforms proposed by the Senate and if those are going to be supported by the House.
Well, I would say that the Senate did have a task force that was organized maybe a couple of years ago, and they were tasked with looking at the funding formula. I wasn't on that particular task committee, but they came up with a 188-page recommendation that listed various recommendations to the funding formula that they would like to see from Senate's perspective. Now, the chair of that committee was the Senate Finance Chairman, Brian Pearson, who's now the majority leader, so he's in a higher position. So I assume the Senate would put forth something, but obviously that would be open to discussion with the House. I don't know if it could take effect next fiscal year, but it's something that would be ongoing discussions, because the funding formula was put in place maybe 12, 11 years ago. And at that time, there was a disadvantage to the Bristol Warren school system because of the fact that we were still receiving more money for our regional bonus, and that would predicate the disbursement or the reduction that we saw of $8 million over 10 years, which was $80 million a year, $800 million a year, or $8 million, well, $800,000 a year, which predicated with an increase in loss rate of about $550 every year going forward. So, will the new formula help the suburban communities? That remains to be seen. Depends on what's in that. But one of the things that we would be fighting for, obviously, is implementation of the regional bonus in that.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think, as you know, we're putting our budgets together now, so the more information, the better. So it'd be great if something is proposed in the Senate, or in the House, if you could let us know if there are things being proposed that would change what we expect.
So I appreciate that, and I know that the funding has gone up, mostly up in the past few years because of stimulus money, and a desire amongst the General Assembly to hold schools harmless, school districts harmless for dips in enrollment, because fundamentally, the way the school formula works at its most basic levels, money follows the student. So wherever the student goes, that's where the state aid goes. And each district gets a different kind of state aid calculated on a variety of factors, mainly, how affluent is the community in which the state aid is going or not affluent. And generally speaking, more affluent communities get less state aid, and then less affluent communities get more state aid, divided in a bunch of different buckets. But the fundamental rule of the formula is the money follows the student. So in the last few years, we talk about the school funding formula as if it's encased in gold and locked in a box somewhere. The funding formula is in fact just letters on the page in the law books, right? And the Assembly has taken those law books over the last couple of years and just made a couple minor tweaks to avoid any one district having a real hit because of dips in enrollment due to COVID. Additionally, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of extra money that have gone to the districts and education stabilization aid. That's just all federal money. And so long story short, you're seeing budgets go like this. Like, I'm trying to figure out, how do I plan? Am I going to get a ton of money? Am I going to get the same? Am I going to be level funded? So I get where the city, both you, Bristol Warren and Barrington have said the same thing. They just want some predictability in the process. So what my recommendation is, given that the Senate has a desire to make a couple of tweaks, I don't know how much desire there is on the House to take up that this year. I suggest that everybody just keep an eye on the House Finance Committee meetings in particular, because it starts with us, and follow that, follow those meetings as close as you can, as deep into the budgeting process as you can until you nail down your number. And I know you got to nail down your number before the state budget is final. I get that. And that surprised a couple of districts last year. That's the best I can offer now. Of course, if we get any news about any substantive change, you guys will be the first to know.
In the governor's budget has in there what the recommended amount is going to be this fiscal year, and I think I noticed that it was a $200,000 decrease for Bristol Warren. And I don't know if that's predicated on the fact that we're not counting all free or reduced lunch program students, or we don't have enough special needs students, because there's like $55 million additional in budget this year, and broken up into different categories. And so they have to see if you are really qualified for certain categories.
So Councilman DePasquale has a question, and I will also have a follow-up unless he asks the same question. Go ahead, John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What has been the feeling in the House or Senate in regards to the 4 regionalized districts? Because the funding formula would just be a part of what we have to contend with.
So I don't sit on the finance committee, and I don't pretend to be a budget expert. I mean, I look at it every year and, really do my best to do the homework. But in terms of the actual ins and outs of the school funding formula, I can't give you chapter and verse on this, but I can say that my impression is, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, that prior to the school funding formula, schools got funded. I think it was much more of a political process, to the extent there was state aid, who's in, who's out, does this town get a little more, does this town get a little more? And the funding formula was an attempt to even all of that out and have some, an equal set of criteria across all school districts, regional or not. And so you'll see, we implemented the school funding formula, and some districts gained and some districts lost, and it was implemented over time, but it was meant to at the end of it give everybody a steady place from which they can anticipate their budgets, and an equal set of criteria across all districts. And I know that the regional bonus went away as part of the school funding formula. I don't see it coming back. I see the governor I see the governor, both Governor Gina Raimondo, former Governor Raimondo, and the current governor, Governor McKee. What they're trying to do is distribute more money in general to everybody by putting more money into the top of the formula and distributing it out. For instance, last year, even though some districts got surprised off what their estimated was, no district got less money than they did the year before last year. At least everybody had level funding. So I think that's what they're going to be trying to do going forward is even out those budgets as much as you can. I just don't get a sense that a regional is coming back.
Right, so I'll never refer to anything from the House or Senate as a bonus, because I don't believe that it ever is. When you look and compare a regionalized district to a non-regionalized, we're not the same. So if you could, please utilize Ledge Research. Walter knows all of this. And please make it your priority, not for us to follow this, for you to follow us. You represent a district that has a regionalized school system. They're not the same. And even our manager can sit with you and help you understand the intricacies. When you compare the two, it's not the same. So when they tried to make believe, and I say they, because it's a group, that they were going to make it all equal and equitable to everybody, you can't. And politics absolutely plays a role, because when you look at the districts who are taking care of their buildings like us, you saw districts who weren't being, I'll use the word now, a bonus for construction. And unfortunately, those hit us negatively. So it isn't a one size fit all. And we really do need you to figure out how you can utilize yourself in the process to be our mouthpiece, because they're not the same.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because at a similar meeting we had a couple of weeks ago with the Bristol Warren School Committee, they came forward and said, the one thing we want you to do, which we're working on legislation right now to draft it up, is, and it gets in the weeds, but basically switch the transportation bucket that Bristol Warren is in to a different bucket, which would generate a savings, I believe, like $1.2 million.
Yeah.
And it
They
doesn't,
want you to change the district.
they want you to change.
That's
the
how far we
transportation-
bust out. Yes,
To change
Yep.
the transportation
Yep.
bucket.
okay.
How it saves money, how it actually saves money, I
So,
can't tell you
then-
chapter and verse, but wait a
Go
minute.
ahead, yep.
All this is to say, Bristol Warren came up with what seems to be a great idea, and we're working to make it happen. So when there's changes like that, that can benefit the district, for sure, we're all in on that. And getting more money for the district, I'm all in on that as well. I don't really care what we call it.
Well, I'm not looking for more money, though. The interesting angle that I try to always focus on is when we hear about equity being spread, we're not the same. So if you were to tell me that all 4 districts are going to be grouped, which we've asked and looked at together, and then the non-regionalized, I would say, great, because you're now applying something that would bring equity to the regionalized and non-regionalized schools. It's just that we're lumped in with
Narragansett, Chapacha.
well, no,
Yeah.
those are our same.
Yeah.
When we're compared to all the others, there are differences and nuances throughout all of those systems that aren't a one size fit all. I don't want to use up any more time.
No.
You've heard my concern on the issues, and Senator Felag knows how we've.
I mean, part of it is that something took place maybe around 4 years ago, where the regional districts had their own meeting. And I think that's part of the imperative aspect of it, is that they need to meet again, need to form a structure, and they need to form an agenda of what they'd like to see within the budget framework. The budget framework begins with the government. And so the legislature massages it and changes it here and there, but the majority of the budget that the governor recommends stays. So if the governor recommended a regional bonus would be for those particular communities, then I'm sure it would probably stay within the budget at hand. The only docket that we have on the books right now is that a regional district get 2% the first year, more than 1% the second year. I've tried for years to put it in the 2% bonus to be carried forth year to year, but it doesn't really carry much weight, it seems.
Well, it's good advice in regards to joining forces with the other regionalized districts, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
So-
Go Go ahead.
If I may, the one message that possibly could come back from this district is we're different than the other regional districts. The reason being is we only have two communities that fund this region, and the other regional districts have three, which makes a difference
Well,
when
there's
it comes
four
down.
districts, I don't know.
No. We only have Bristol and Warren that fund the Bristol Warren Regional School District, but Chepachet has more communities that fund theirs. Charahoe has more.
Participating in the district.
They have more communities that fund theirs. We only have two. So I'm not saying that we deserve more, but we only have two communities that fund the Bristol Warren Regional School District. Be that as it may, the money follows the student. You're 100% correct. But if the student comes back to the district, the money stays in that district he goes. So that should be the first thing that changes. That money stays there for the fiscal year. If that student goes to that, say a student we'd send out of district to Portsmouth High School, and he goes there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month and decides that they want to come back for whatever the reason may be, the money stays in the Portsmouth district for the fiscal year. That money should come back to us. So that would be one thing that would probably be beneficial to have change.
Sure.
The transportation cost, you're absolutely right. We bus more than any other district furthest away. We will send somebody to Mount St. Charles, which is in Woonsocket. How Hendricken doesn't fill into that is mind-boggling, but we won't send somebody to Hendricken. So that needs to change also. And truth be told, we should really take a look at it. Why are we sending people on our public school buses that are going to private schools? I know it's been in the works. I was a beneficiary of myself, but that needs to stop. That really needs to stop. If you're choosing to send your child to a private school, then you can figure out a way to get them there. So that message should also go back to help for our transportation costs. The regional bonus, when did it stop?
Like
Stop.
11 years.
Stop.
Yeah,
Formula.
stopped 11 years ago,
And
right?
when they did the decline.
What
Yeah.
happened was that there was a recommendation for a new funding formula. I was a legislator at the time, I voted against it.
No, and I understand it.
I
Yeah.
knew we were gonna lose $8 million, and prior to that, what was happening, it was basically a process where the House Committee would make recommendations year after year to whatever the amount you were receiving the year prior and giving everyone a 3% raise.
And then-
everybody a 4% raise.
Yeah.
So our regional bonus kept escalating as a part of that.
The other thing that's affecting our out of district costs is these other schools that we're starting to compete with that are creating these schools that students want to go to because we can't provide them the same classes here. We all need to be on the same page. Somebody needs to get with RIDE and get everybody on the same page and have everybody being provided the same classes and get everybody up to that standard, whatever that standard may be. Because those costs are real
Yeah,
and they're expensive.
and I'll tell you, the General Assembly, not last year, but the year before, enacted a law requiring RIDE to try to make uniform those CTE programs, which is what you're
Yes.
talking about. right?
Yes.
So if a kid in Warren wants to take a particular kind of vocational class, they can go to a career and technical program, and they find one they like in Westerly, for example.
Yep.
Then, and I just saying this for the folks who are watching, because I know.
Yeah.
But they can go there, no questions asked, under state law the way it is today. 2 years ago, we enacted a law, which I voted for, and I think you did too. It said to RIDE, look, if Bristol Warren has like 5 programs, and there are and a kid, let's say one of them is in auto mechanics or something
Sure.
like that. And a kid doesn't want to do Warren's program, but rather wants to do Cranston's program. If Cranston's program is substantially similar to Warren's program, then the kid stays in Warren.
The child's just.
Saving the transportation money, saving the money following the pupil to Cranston. RIDE is still trying to figure out how to implement that law, which is, I got a beef with that. And we're keeping a close eye on them, but
This was
to the-
supposedly the first year that was supposed to be
it
implemented.
was supposed to be implemented last year for 2022. They didn't, right? And then we're waiting the list for 2023. All this to say, I do want to cap this just one thing, and I'll come back to what Joe was saying. I'm all for getting the town, the school committee more money. I don't care what they call it, as long as the green comes, you know what I mean? So we'll stay on top of that with this year's budget. And what I'm hearing more than anything else between Bristol Warren Schools, this committee, Barrington Schools, and the Barrington Town Committee is everyone is super nervous about changes to that formula. We will keep an extra special eye on it this year.
Thank you.
It looks like Carrie, go ahead,
I
please.
don't have a question about this, but I realize it was not made clear, but Representative Speakman is unwell and is not here this evening. I would imagine you might be watching the live feed, but I just didn't want anybody to think that she was missing it or.
And I apologize for not addressing that. Yes, so if Representative June Speakman, if you are watching, hopefully get well soon. And we'll see you soon. Grant, do you have any?
No, I'm good.
Questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Kate, I think we've covered education, but if you have anything else to follow up with, we can,
Well, the one last one. that-
go ahead.
I was gonna say the last one, the last one is, and I was at that last meeting of the legislative workshop called by the school committee. Was suggesting something that I think we've probably been suggesting for years now. Forever, as long as I've lived here in town. That there be some sort of periodic review of the enabling legislation that was never baked into the original language of that document that created regional school district. And so it has just existed as originally written for ever and ever for going on
30 years.
30 years. So that is completely just ponderous to me that a document like that created this regional district never provided for any type of review that would update it, to modernize it, to make it more fair, to make it more equitable. All this discussion of equity among the school districts, whether they be regional or not, will never happen here until we get a real good look at the enabling legislation. And that would include the balance of the equity of the number of students in the district, because it used to be about 70-30, but that is shifting and getting closer to more of the balance of equality of number of students from Warren as Bristol, but the representation has not and will not change unless we agree to review this and maybe have a little muscle behind us, if that is possible.
So what would be the first
I
step?
think
Yeah,
the
Yes.
first step would be for the Bristol Council and the Warren Council in the school committee to agree on what type of language they want.
Joint resolution.
And
Okay.
back it up with joint resolution, so that way the legislature doesn't have any qualms with putting it forward and passing it where each of the communities of what kind of specific piece.
So a joint resolution, at the very least, to have a mechanism placed into the enabling legislation that created the Bristol Warren Regional School District for review.
It wouldn't be the very.
Yeah,
least,
but
but it's-
Say Warren says 10 years and Bristol says, no, let's do it every 15, you know.
Okay,
I don't want to get into that.
Sure.
It's up to be able to say both communities and the school committee are in agreement as to what type of language they want in that particular bill. And put it forward.
Maybe the feelings in Bristol have changed. They've not had any interest in this.
I know in the past, Councilman Di Pasquale has asked me in terms of the makeup of the committee to change that.
Yeah.
And my response has always been that it would not take place unless we have both communities in agreement.
And we brought it. And
So, when the legislation gets submitted, it's usually where, first question that's always asked, you have a resolution from the existing communities in agreement.
okay. Fair enough.
What he said.
Yeah, perfect. Anyone else that's around the education? Back to you, Kate.
Okay, so the next item that I had on my list was elections, and this is one that actually I don't think takes a lot of discussion, but I know the legislature did a lot of work on the election process, and fully respect the work that the legislature has done. But one thing, just ask you to keep in mind is that there's a cost that comes with all the amendments that have been made. And those costs have been significant for us with regards to the expenses related to the election process change, and in particular, early voting. Early voting, I fully understand the legislature had their reasons for instituting it and, trying to improve voter access. But it has been expensive for the municipalities, and we would just ask in the future, if there's further amendments that are proposed that affect the voting process, that you consider both the cost to the communities, but also the difficulty in staffing the polls. We've had significant problems and challenges when staffing the polls, and the longer that voting period gets, the harder it is to have the staff. So we'd ask that you not only consider the cost, but if there is a cost, that something be written in to the legislation that provides reimbursement to the towns for the increased costs associated with legislative changes. And then just one thing that we found out, I think last week, if there's a municipal or school referendum for a bond item referendum, that is also going to require 14 days of early voting in addition to the single day referendum, which, my opinion, it's just my opinion, that's excessive. Typically, we ran referendums as a one-day event. We'd be open from the morning into the evening, but to have 14 days of voting for a bond item is going to be expensive, very expensive.
You could take a bond for the bond.
Right, and it's how much are we actually going to, how many voters are we actually going to see on a daily basis if we spread it out over 14 days?
Well, I think that's a good question, because I know in the early voting, I came in and voted early and there was nobody in here. So, I mean, I think it is extended a bit too far. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing to have early voting. It's great for people to be able to do that, but again, might look at the time frame. Just because, my experience and people that I talked to about early voting said they came in, there was nobody in here. So it might benefit a few people on on that end of the spectrum, but I think we could still offer early voting, but make it more reasonable and more cost effective. So I would agree with that.
One of the things we've discussed is, maybe if the time period was shorter, you could include a weekend day and really.
That would be
benefit
helpful.
people.
I think,
Um,
yes, because many people can't or have trouble getting in during the work week. So adding a day on the weekend, I know it's more expensive for clerks, of course, but that might help incentivize people to come in earlier. So
It would be super helpful if you could get us a pretty good estimate of what the increased costs are, so we can take that to the powers that be and be like, either we need a change or we need some money.
Cost of, do you want cost of only one referendum, or do you want one that we spend with having all the polls,
You like in a given election year,
given election?
right? You got a primary, I got a general. How much,
Yeah.
think of like the big ticket election.
We
and
also
then
have
they give us like in a year, this is how much extra we can spend on top of our budget. That'd be great.
That will include the PPP for next year too.
Presidential preference right now.
Yeah, perfect. But that's three big ones in 1 year, right? I mean, get that dollar amount up so it makes a bigger impression when we show it to our colleagues.
Are we taking, because the way the agenda reads, discussion and action, are we making motions to direct you to do things or to memorialize this in some way? Or is this discussion, we're gonna,
Well, this wasn't advertised.
No, I think typically this is a kind of an open discussion.
can't.
And then.
well, we have just,
The last one we did, the last one we did was Zoom.
have people here.
Yeah, and it's more or less,
You have to advertise the agenda that you're gonna make motions on. You can't have this and then, so that's what's not advertised.
We don't even have this.
Right.
yeah, no, yeah,
You can't.
I'll
It's a
make-
workshop.
no, did you send this to us? Did you?
No,
send-
I just finished it.
Oh, yeah, which is fine, which is fine.
would have to be advertised.
Correct, yeah, so there's really, it's our council's positions on these issues, which we want you to bring back to the House and to the Senate. That's the way I look at
Yeah,
this.
this is just me making recommendations.
Right.
Yeah.
And, the council,
Information.
we could look up something where the council says, I disagree with you completely, and then the legislators get to hear that and.
Right, but
and-
I guess what I'm to help Ms. Cronin and the public understand the process, we can put any of these on the agenda at next month's meeting and advertise them and take action. So I think even now this is beneficial because we're hearing the feedback, and we probably will do that on some of these issues. So
Well-
that there is an official position from the
Yeah.
council going to the House and Senate.
Yeah, the resolution will probably be discussed. Yeah. Anything else on the elections?
That was it for elections.
Perfect. On to broadband.
I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
Especially comments, it's interesting because you could put forth a resolution on that and carry some weight and say, relate to, change it from 14 days to maybe 3 or something.
Okay,
But if you want to change,
Or even 7, even cutting it in half, it'd still be a long period, but
I mean, election would be the top of this, but,
And
Do-
It's also worth saying that in, when something's gonna come up at, well, I'll just use an example as a Barrington, before we had COVID and before we made this change to the voting law, we were gonna have an election for an open vacancy on the town council, person that retired. And there was one candidate for one seat, one declared candidate for one seat. And it was like a February election, and the town came to us and said, the Barrington delegation, and said, it is gonna be stupid to open up 5 polling spots for an election for which there is one candidate. When we just do something to shrink it to like the high school for a day, and we'll just bang it out that way. And we were able to put through, you know,
I recall
assembly,
that.
the
Yeah.
assembly can move fast when it needs to. And we were able to put through legislation through both sides and get it signed by the governor in advance of that primary to allow Barrington to skip all the rules and go to one polling place for this one election. So while I appreciate getting something that we won't want to do this every time, and all these new voting laws have created downriver problems for the cities and towns, you can always come to us if something comes up and it's like, there's just something's going to happen that's clearly stupid in the law the way it is. We can usually carve something out quickly for that one time.
right. I mean, this is just an unfunded mandate.
Yes.
Back to you, Kate.
Sure. The next category I had is just general recommendations about broadband. As this is kind of my soapbox issue, as I'm sure you've heard as legislators, and I know the council has heard this from a million different times. We are about to see an unprecedented amount of federal funding flowing into the state for broadband, more than $100 million. You know, I personally am very pleased with Rhode Island Commerce's efforts, and I think that they're doing an excellent job organizing around this issue and creating their broadband office. So, you know, anything that the legislature can do to support them in this effort, I think is beneficial to cities and towns. And then, but one issue that keeps coming up is about fiber that's owned by state agencies, and in particular, that's owned by DOT. Back when the ARA funds were a thing, the state of Rhode Island installed fiber backbone all over the state. So the state of Rhode Island has more fiber installed than any other state in the country, but we have less people connected to it than any other state in the country. And part of that is that certain state agencies, in particular DOT, actually own fiber within the bundle that's been installed, but it's dark, it's not used at all. And they haven't shared any information about where this fiber is located. So we don't know if we can use it or anyone can use it. And we don't know if DOT is intending to use it in the future. So just anything that could be done to improve coordination between the state agencies so that Rhode Island Commerce can come up with a plan to effectively use the federal money that's coming to the state while leveraging the assets that already exist, because it doesn't make sense to duplicate efforts if there's already assets that are in the ground.
so what is Rhode Island Commerce response to that?
They're trying.
How-
They requested the information, they just haven't received it. And it may be that nobody has it in a format that's shareable, and there may need to be some work done to figure that out, but it's a significant asset, and it would be a significant benefit to the residents and the businesses in the state, and in particular in Warren, because our connectivity is not good. So anything that can be done to improve it is going to be a big help.
So there needs to be more uniformity, sounds like, in how people report it and declare it, and so that you can get your head around who has what and.
Right, information sharing. But I'm very excited about broadband in general and thankful for everything that Commerce is doing and everything that you have done to enable Commerce to do what they're doing.
I think that, my gut is that when, somebody makes a big pile of money available, all of a sudden that issue gets attention. And whereas broadband has gotten maybe short shrift after that initial burst of like, oh, I gotta get broadband in, and then what happens to it, right? Because we rely on the utilities and private commercial interests to light that stuff up. I think with the money, my gut would be that you'll see a sustained multi-year effort to improve it in the state, because the money's there, let's use it. But to the extent that we have input, and, you know, anything we do will certainly come through the House. We'll take your comments and make sure everybody knows.
Okay, move on.
No, nothing else.
Sorry, I'm multitasking. Yeah, does anybody have any?
I don't.
So the next one, I know the council will have opinions on as well, so I'm gonna run through my bullet points and then discussion can ensue. The next topic that I had on my list was affordable housing, which obviously we know has been a topic of much conversation. So just my bullet points, and this is really just as it relates to the legislature. The first suggestion was to work with housing authorities. You know, this came after a discussion that I had with our local housing director, Micah Bruzzi, who, as you know, is very up to speed on all things affordable housing and also on all things municipal. So his suggestion was that the legislature and the state should be working with housing authorities to create a program to count housing choice vouchers in affordable housing calculations. As of right now, anyone who receives a voucher, like a section 8 voucher, that doesn't count as affordable housing. Which doesn't seem to make sense because you have a unit where an affordable rent is being paid by someone who qualifies for affordable housing, but yet it doesn't count as affordable housing. Michael at Housing has done the calculation, and instead of being around 4% affordable housing, if we had the ability to count our housing choice vouchers in town, our level of affordable housing would be closer to 7.8%, which is a whole lot closer to the 10% goal than 4%. So technology is a wonderful thing. These housing authorities do an excellent job at monitoring the incomes of people in these units and monitoring the rents in these units. And it seems like it should be very doable to count those units and to make sure every year that they maintain. I mean, obviously vouchers are portable, but every year they're getting counted by the housing authority. Why can't the state just use that data and incorporate it into their calculations? So that was the first suggestion. The second suggestion was something that came up during the community discussion that the legislators had with the public about incentivizing development by nonprofits and public entities, which seems to be the direction that leads to the best outcomes. And along with that, reconsidering standards for private developer participation in the comprehensive permit process. You know, maybe if you're going to allow the private developers to continue to participate, maybe they should include more affordable units than just the 25% base that they are right now. When the affordable housing comprehensive permit process was first instituted, private for-profit developers were not allowed to participate in it at all. And now they are, and they're given the same standing as a nonprofit who is creating 100% affordable. They're not, it's the same process, whether it's the 25% for-profit or the 100% nonprofit, which doesn't seem to be leading to the best outcomes. One other suggestion is to consider looking at fair market rent as a measure of affordability instead of area median income. There's been a lot of discussion that area median income looks at the income for a very wide area, which obviously is set by the federal government, and we're not asked, you know, this wouldn't be fair to ask the legislature to change that because you can't. But instead, if you were looking at fair market rents that are calculated community by community, again, through the housing authorities, then that is a better measure of what an affordable rent is in that community, rather than looking at this area median income, which takes into account communities that have higher incomes than a town like Warren. And then the last bullet is just a general comment to encourage the legislature to work with the local municipalities as partners to understand the need and the gaps. Because towns really do know what's going on within their borders, and a one-size-fits-all approach is not, in my opinion, is not going to lead to the outcomes that we need, which is to provide housing for the people who need housing. I don't think anyone is anti-development. I think the problem is just that the methods to get there, it needs to be a partnership, because when the discussion becomes adversarial, then nothing happens and we all just end up spending a lot of money on lawyers. No offense.
I can add to that.
Yes, please, by all means.
Just so the legislature can hear my opinion, I'm against affordable housing, especially the way the definition is now. It negatively impacts the communities that are being forced to accept something they have no control over. I think it's a sin that a housing developer can put somebody in a house that wouldn't pass the normal standards. The lot size, all of the fast track, in my opinion, is a sin, because you're allowing a standard, or maybe that's not, I don't know, I get very upset about it and I lose my.
You're right on point.
I know, but I lose my train of thought
Yeah,
in
no,
my,
he's-
in my eloquence, because
Yeah.
the process is there to protect people who are building. Not just the developer, but the people down the road that are gonna purchase those units and live in those units. And when you look at the stamp size, full occupation of a lot with a stamp size yard and just no, I don't know, the whole thing upsets me. I'm against it. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's one size fits all. I know there are people like our manager who could participate and have input that would be meaningful to the individual communities that have to deal with this. I'm usually against things that negatively impact our neighborhoods, be it economic development or be it housing. I don't see this as a good thing for us. I see it as a money grab. And I would like other people to look into this. And I know Ms. Speakman is on a committee, and I think chairing it, or I don't know. I think people are afraid to say this is bad. I don't know why they're afraid to say it's bad. But I don't hear anybody saying they're against affordable housing.
Well, I mean, respectfully, you're in the minority with that viewpoint.
That's
Because
my
it's been,
point.
right, well, you're in the minority in that viewpoint. Let me finish. If Rep Speakman, I don't want to speak for Rep Speakman, but I'll say this. We had our community meeting, and a lot of people turned out, and there were a lot of questions about this. The affordable housing law was generated back in the 90s. And I think that there is a widespread agreement in the state that it hasn't worked, along the lines of what you're saying, Joe. There is
But I'm
also,
gonna be in the minority.
because there's a widespread agreement that we do need affordable or workforce housing in the state, and we need to figure out how to get it built and get
But
it
I
built
said I'm
quickly.
against affordable housing by this definition.
Okay.
But
Well,
I don't hear anybody else saying that.
Well, the conversations are happening, and in the last couple of years, so in the House, we have a new speaker, Joe Shikarchi. Joe Shikarchi came in, and his personal goal, his personal mandate is to get a handle on this housing development in Rhode Island and get more stock built and get more roofs over the heads of Rhode Islanders. We, the House, I'm not involved in these specific discussions, but Rep. Speakman certainly is, are taking a big sort of, nothing is off limits look at the entire set of general laws that apply to housing policy and how all this stuff happens. Because I think there's widespread agreement that the comp permit process hasn't generated affordable housing. The affordable housing law hasn't generated affordable housing as it's defined under that law. And that there are a lot of Rhode Islanders out there who are struggling to put roofs over their heads. And the ones that do have it, there's a ton of them, though it's very tenuous because the prices are so damn high. And God forbid you're a kid who graduated from college and you want to stay in Rhode Island next to your family, can't buy a place. we're all working very hard to try to fix that. So stay tuned is the best I got. I think you'll see some big changes this year. There is, I know Rep Speakman is, they're working on a variety of bills to try to get at this stuff. We nibbled around the edges last year with a lot of low hanging fruit. We passed, 8, 9, 10, 12 laws designed to sort of eliminate the obvious stupidity in some of the zoning process, which maybe wasn't obvious when it was generated. That's not fair to legislatures in the past, but over
Right.
time with
I mean, I
technology.
agree,
Yeah.
there was more land. And this wasn't impacting communities like it is now.
Well, more land, less people, and things, and things have gotten expensive. So all this is to say, I think you're, in the broader sense, not the technical legal definition. I know you're, people want to see affordable housing in Rhode Island. I think you're in that bucket. And I think
I am,
people,
but-
and I think people agree with you that the technical legal definition that's on the books now doesn't work. And the House gets it. And I think the Senate does too. And we're working hard to fix it.
So if I could just follow up, what Joe was trying to land on is the comprehensive permit process. Once it was opened up to for-profit builders, it created a multitude of issues that the local municipalities had to deal with. And for them to be able to circumvent the planning and zoning process made it very challenging for us at the local level. And what I always tell folks is, I'm never afraid to go out in public and, I'm in the markets, I'm in the donut shops, whatever, and folks will approach us and they talk, as you know, very well, and they're very passionate about this stuff. If it's possible to take the message back to the State House, if the comprehensive permit plan can be tweaked, that yes, you may be able to be entitled to these different waivers, but you still have to go through the process. It shouldn't just be, well, this is a comprehensive permit plan, and you have to approve it. It shouldn't be rammed down our throat, because if that's going to be the case, then my response back to the state is, then you take over the hearings for the planning and the zoning, and you take over the regulatory for the waivers that need to be done down in the developers that are coming in for profit. Because if it's a nonprofit, no problem, because they're going to make 100% of those units affordable. But if it's for the profit individual who's coming in, and Joe's right, it is a money grab. It's a huge money grab.
Well, so we talked about this at the community meeting.
Sure.
The comprehensive, now listen, I'm not here to pass on the wisdom of the comprehensive permit law, but just for everyone's, edifications, what the history on this thing is.
It predates all of us.
It predates all of us.
Yes.
And the whole idea was, let's incentivize any kind of developer to make affordable housing by making it easier to
Well,
distribute.
it was first incentivized for the
Sure.
nonprofit.
And then they added the
Then
for-profit
they had the for-profit.
in an
Yeah.
effort to try to build more stock. And this is the problem. Rhode Island has essentially gone all in over the past few decades about the way we're going to get stock is to incentivize private developers. It's a, let's make it easy for somebody who is in the business of making money. Let's make it easy for them to make money by having them build our affordable housing stock. And everyone agrees it's not working. So now all the other options on the table, just like I said before, that comprehensive permit law, we can talk about the wisdom of putting it in place all day long, but I think people do see the problems as you have described.
I think, go ahead, Carrie.
Back to what, excuse me, what Joe was saying, I was hearing that you were saying something to the effect of what is getting built or what is being offered using these tools is substandard to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So do we have, is there an example of that here?
If you can come in, if you're a developer and you're on the fast track and you need 39 parking spaces, and you can legally say, well, we're gonna do 19. And then the zoning board and planning board doesn't even get to hear on that, and then that gets to go to the State House. Then, the appeal gets to go to the state board, and then let's say they come back. All right, so in my opinion, that would have never passed because the planning board process would have said, well, no, you can't. Maybe you get 28, maybe you get 25,
Yeah, so.
So those are the examples that I feel are very detrimental to the neighborhoods and to the people. I mean, I'm not saying, and I'm not gonna back down on my position in regards to trying to make myself seem better sounding to those who don't like hearing this. I'm against this process. I'm against this definition. I'm against what this is doing with its negative impacts to our neighborhoods. It does not help me feel like I'm doing something good by having a cluster of units put in someplace that I think in 5 years, 10 years down the road are going to be bad housing. I've been here long enough to see what good housing is and what bad housing is. And they're substandard. And I think we're pushing them on the poor, and the poor aren't even poor. I have no problem with public housing. I have no problem with, or I don't know if that's even the right term that I want to use. I have no problem trying to help people live within their means. If government can do that somehow, I'm all for it. I'm against things that negatively impact our neighborhoods. I'm against something, especially double down against something where we're being penalized for doing the right thing. We've done the right thing in Warren. We've tried to do the right thing, and yet we get forced on us a process that allows others a loophole. It's a legal loophole to make money and take advantage of our good planning, and I'm against it.
I agree with you that the comprehensive permit plan is broken. Just the fact that for 25% affordable units, you can build what you want, essentially. And it doesn't get us any closer to the 10%. And that's the problem. And I like the points that you brought up here about the count, first of all, because that's a big issue, the count, how we're counting our affordable units or not. And if we can raise that level and get closer to the 10%, even though it's a high place to get to. I mean, I'm not sure that'll happen, but I think we should work towards that. But with the comprehensive permit plan offering build anything for 25%, it's not working. Also, the AMI is broken. I mean, the AMI in this area is supposedly almost $100,000, and so you take 80% of that, and it's $80,000. I mean, it's not affordable. I think the definition of affordable is also broken. So I like the idea of fair market rents as opposed to tying it to AMI, because that's a moving target that's really difficult to pin down. So I'm very much in favor of fair market rents. But there are cases of the comprehensive permit plan actually working. I think there's a proposal right now out on Child Street to build 40 affordable units. And I mean, I think most people would agree that that's probably a pretty good proposal. But it's East Bay CDC is doing it. It's not a private developer. And then putting all.
I mean, I'll agree with that when I see how they deal with the wetlands issues. I'll agree with that when I see what they're going to give people that have to be there down the road. And another point, I'm not going to belabor it, but I think an even better position that I could bring up that's specific to Warren with what Ms. Cronin referenced or questioned, the demolition process. We've had our neighborhoods destroyed in the past. We've put, we've had key structures in our neighborhoods that we felt were important. And we, as a council, before I got elected, very close to when I got elected, 20 years ago, brought that responsibility, the demolition permit, to the council so that elected officials could do something that they could either live or die with because of their decision, not just the building inspector. And that disappears now with the comp plan.
The comprehensive permit application, just to be clear, that's what we're talking about. The comp plan is a different thing and should incorporate these values that we're expressing here. But the comprehensive permit application really is a workaround, and it's the way it's being abused currently is not okay. And it makes us feel powerless over the fabric and the character and the quality of the town that we're charged to keep and protect.
And it's not accomplishing what it's supposed to accomplish.
Now it's putting
providing affordable. I mean, we all need affordable units in every municipality. It's a crisis not in Warren, but all over Rhode Island, all over the United States. It's a crisis. And I'm glad to see that there's actually, Speaker Shikarchi has got legislation that's in February going to be brought out. And we have a new housing czar, which, let's hope that he can corral the disparate groups. And I think that's another big problem is that housing in Rhode Island is just scattershot. It's all over the place. You need somebody to bring that together, and that might be the housing czar and whatever he can do to bring these groups together.
I will say this. There are problems with a small p and there are problems with a big P. And this housing thing is a problem with the big P. One of the reasons is, and it's just human nature, right? There's town councils like you that get elected by the people of their towns across the state, Narragansett, Coventry, North Kingstown, all those places, and they all have concerns that are very specific to their geographic location. And when the assembly comes out and says, we want to create a housing law of some kind that applies statewide, everyone goes, how's that going to affect our community? And you get a lot of pushback from those communities through their reps. So I think if we're going to, as a state, advance on this problem, there's going to have to be some sort of consensus amongst the people and their elected officials at all levels that we have to get on the same page and we perhaps have to sacrifice some local concerns in order for the big picture. I don't know what that is, but even last year when we were passing what I call the low-hanging fruit stuff, like putting on like making it easier to put an in-law on a house, right? The attached dwelling unit, the ADUs. That got pushback in the House. We're just talking about changing the zoning to make it easier to throw an in-law on a house. And there were reps during the floor debate who were like, I can't do this because my community can't stand it, particularly the communities that attract the Airbnbers and the VRBO types who want to use those properties.
Short-term rental is a whole different discussion.
That's a whole thing, right? And so,
Yeah.
and this is one of these times where we're trying to enact a statewide policy, which seems like it should be a layup. And
So my
and
take
it wasn't. So what I'm saying is that whatever's coming down the pike this time is going to be a lot bigger changes. And I just ask everyone to have an open mind.
So my takeaway from the discussion that I'm hearing is the comprehensive permit plan can work, but I think it needs to be updated to 2023 and what's being concerns around what we're dealing with. Or option B, then we throw it all back in your lap and you guys deal with it. That would be my message to the speaker. I understand that the speaker's number one priority is affordable housing. It's no secret. Judging by what my wife does and what Rep. Speakman does, this is number one priority. But he also has to understand that we're the ones that are boots on the ground that are dealing with these issues. And I'm not saying we're saying no 100%, but we still need to have some type of oversight and control.
And I think that, and I'll say this is where the East Bay shines. This conversation we're having and the phone calls that I get from you all, and I know Wally does, and I know Rep. Speakman does all the time. We have a very robust up and down the line communication in the East Bay between the local authorities and the state
Yeah.
authorities. And that message will be transmitted, right?
Right. And
The rest of the state, I don't know sometimes. Sometimes you're like, do you guys talk to each other?
We do, and I
And
talk
then-
to my colleagues
Yeah.
throughout, this
But
other
there are
cities. and
5
towns.
counties, and there shouldn't be a problem with having 5 policies that fine tune the communities that willing to serve. I don't get it. I really don't. I can't even stand hearing it because it's so offensive to the local level politician that
Okay.
you're going to tell us things that are going to come back and we're not going to like. My God. I mean, it's like, why are we even trying to govern at the local level? If we're expected, if we didn't like what we heard last year, we hear what's coming. Why? I mean, I don't get it.
I invite you to tune in to the hearings on the legislation so that you can
It frustrates me
get it.
too
I know it
much.
does. So you can get a different perspective.
My perspective is I know my community and what works in Johnston doesn't necessarily work here. You guys have to hear us. We shouldn't have to accept what rolls down from Providence. I don't get it. I'm not gonna get it. You're not gonna convert me. That's why I've run for rep in the past, because I didn't like what was going on. And maybe I will down the road, because I'm not here for the rest of my life.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask you a favor when we're all done with these, because I want a district in Warren where Warren has a representative again. I love you. I appreciate what you do.
We're just
'cause
under
you're
the
doing it for
population.
Bennington. I love June. I love what June does. She's doing it for Bristol. I've been a close friend of Walter my entire life. I've watched him, I've admired him, I've helped him, and I've appreciate him taking on that huge district. I don't want it here. It's been 1654 or 1754 is the last time Warren had the first time, this is the first time we share representatives. And it happened because of politics. And I can't stand it. And I would love to see something happen on that.
All right, let's get back on.
No,
track
no,
over
no.
here.
Let's,
Well,
no.
We're gonna move
No,
on.
I'm gonna say one thing.
No,
I'm gonna say
Go
one
ahead.
thing, Joe.
Yeah.
If you're suggesting
What?
that I don't look out for my constituents, in Warren,
No, that's
we
not what
we got a
I
problem.
said. I said, you are doing a good job and you represent Barrington as well. I said June's doing a good job and she represents Bristol as well. I want Warren to have its own representative again. Because for 400 years we did, or 300 years, my math's off.
Yeah,
This isn't against you. This is against the fact that things come from the state that we, and I maybe didn't make that point clear, that we here have to accept. And sometimes they're not things that we like to accept. Just like other people hear things they don't like to accept it. And I'm not saying, I didn't say you're doing a bad job.
He didn't say that. That's
When I
not how
do,
heard it.
you'll hear me because you'll know I said, you're doing a bad job. That's not what I said.
All right. How about? Yeah. How about, hold on a second. Yeah, because we're not here for that.
I'm not apologizing for what I said. I'm being specific. I did not say you're doing a bad job.
Why don't we get back on point? Why don't we get back on task for why we are here?
Well, it is.
No, but like, we're here to give the message. I think the message has come across loud and clear. Anything else you want to add, Kate, on the affordable housing? Okay, so I understand members of the public may want to speak. That's not really what this is about. But, well, this is this is from the council to our legislative leaders to send them the message that we want. Now, with that said, I have no problem allowing members of the public to speak, but we're not going to get into the weeds about, something going down some type of a rabbit hole. So if you want to come forward real quick and ask a question, I'm okay with that. On the subject matter that we're talking about.
On
So
the
which,
affordable housing, the most
Correct.
important thing that they miss out on the affordable housing is what people actually pay for rents. Subsidized is great, but it's a much higher rent. I, as a landlord, I can tell you, I get tenants paying me 30-40% less, and that doesn't count. The second thing is, there's an illusion. The illusion is there's no affordable housing in the town of Warren. When there's no vacancies and people are paying the rent, there's affordability. People are willing to pay it. So that's a totally different issue. The issue is the income people being able to pay for that rent. But to say that there's a housing crisis, there isn't. If you had a lot of vacancies, you'd have a housing crisis. But when everything's full and people are willing to pay, you don't have an affordability issue. That's my point.
and
I would-
just for the, just come one back, one will sec, just identify yourself.
Oh, Louis Rigo, 12 Taddy Avenue.
Thank you.
I will say,
Thank
I will say this, and I think it's worth pointing out just so that people understand. And this is, I didn't do this, I didn't vote on this ages ago, but the legal definition of affordable housing contemplates a deeded affordable,
Yes.
a
Yes.
place that is deeded affordable housing for at least 30 years.
Correct.
And my understanding is that the reason why they did that was to prevent the economic winds from really adjusting the market rate for whatever the unit was. And that's why rents aren't included. I don't know, I totally hear and kind of agree that there's a room for looking at rents when you're trying to figure out what the number is for a town. It's just, that's the way the law is these days, and hopefully we fix that.
Okay. On to cost of waste disposal. I believe that's next on the hit parade.
Yes,
There's
another nice,
public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yep, come on.
Derek Trombley, 510 Child Street.
Thank you.
I rose to speak on this just because it ties into affordable housing and it didn't see it on the agenda. Public transportation is a huge issue. It ties into affordable housing in terms of reducing the need for parking lots and being able to use more space for affordable housing. So I would encourage or request that the council or the state reps try to see what we can do to increase what we have in our community for public transportation. Thank you very much.
Great point, Derek. Thank you. Sure.
Tom Padua from Warren. As the last gentleman mentioned, and I'll put it under the same heading, public transportation is vital to the cities and towns of Rhode Island. RIPTA is doing what it can, but it needs more funding to restore service, fix the bus shelters, repair the information displays. The bus riders don't want to move out of Kennedy Plaza. I know I'm a little off topic here, but Kennedy Plaza is centrally located. It's got the space for the bus lines that use it, and more spaces were there and taken away. Most bus riders can go anywhere in Rhode Island with one bus change. It already exists. It can be renovated much more cheaply than moving to a new location. At the very least, it should stay as a central bus hub unless and until another hub is built. RIPTA and Rhode Island Department of Transportation haven't fulfilled their promise to consider riders' needs. I ask the General Assembly to act to protect public bus service. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Tom.
I figure this is a good place, since it's kind of a crossover question. It has to do with affordability, because property taxes all ties into affordability for houses. We already talked about education, so this is kind of a crossover for Representative Knight. You sponsored Bill H5118.
You have to tell me what it is.
Okay, that's the one where you sponsored it, introduced, you should know it. It's the one where you allow.
Respectfully, I don't know the numbers. If you tell me what the substance
sure,
of the bill
okay.
is, I'll tell you exactly what it's about.
Let's back up for a second. What was your name again, please?
Alan Myers, sorry,
And residence, please.
Tiverton, Rhode Island.
Okay, so just so you know,
Mhm.
we're not here to get into the weeds of whatever a rep or a senator introduced in the past. We're
Yeah.
specifically going to talk about, if you want to talk about the affordable housing that we've presented, perfect. If
Okay.
not, please sit down.
Okay,
Warrant issues.
Yeah, no, so
Yeah.
like,
Well,
this, no.
he's a rep.
So, yeah, I understand that. But
This is about.
We're specifically here
Warrant
for what
issues.
the Warren Town Council wants our legislative representatives to bring back to the state, what we're presenting to them.
okay. I
So-
think this ties in. If you
Well,
want me to
I'm
tell you what it
gonna
is?
give you a little bit of latitude, but if
All right.
I don't think it ties in, I'm gonna ask you to please sit down.
Okay, I
So,
will,
go ahead.
okay, I'll give you the 2-second thing.
Yep,
It has to do with allowing property taxes to be discounted to municipal employees and teachers. That was just introduced.
okay,
And what that is going to do, of course, that's going to raise property taxes for everybody. It creates kind of a caste, a society.
I
with certain people.
understand. Keep going.
And it has to do with property taxes.
Okay,
With affordable housing, one of the biggest problems we have is the property taxes across all around. And so everybody across the whole,
you have to absorb the difference.
That's
Because
right.
there's a shortfall.
that's right,
There's a
exactly.
shortage.
And
Yes,
so I was asking what was the status of that bill? Because you, the representative who
okay,
introduced it, I think it crosses over. I mean, if it's something you don't want to hear.
Rep Knight.
Yeah, that's fine.
respond.
okay,
Alan, I did. I put in a bill. So in
you're
Barrington,
good, you're good. Yeah.
I'll just tell you that, I'll just give you the story.
Mhm.
In Barrington, I have a constituent who is a municipal employee who, during the election season, told me that they had suffered, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but basically they had suffered a change in financial conditions and it was going to be hard to stay in the house and that they own in Barrington because of this change of financial conditions, primarily due to the property tax. And, you know, in thinking about what solutions there may be for this person, it occurred to me that there's a public service program to forgive federal loans at the federal level for people who do go to college or go to grad school, get their degree, incur the loans, and then they do like 10 years worth of public service. And then there's a certain level of forgiveness from the federal government because of that public service. And so I made a bill that sort of incorporated that idea as a starting point to a conversation about what, if anything, and I don't know if we can, what, if anything, we might be able to do to help this person and others similarly situated. So I drafted up the bill and I put it in. I look forward to have a hearing so that I can hear back from folks, stakeholders, League of Cities and Towns, whoever comes out to testify. And that bill really is, it's technically a proposal, but really is as a, hey, tell me what you think about this, because I got a problem I'm trying to solve and I would like you all to talk to me about it. And I'm using the legislative process to figure out what the answer is.
It's nice, but it's an issue that deals with all towns in the state.
It's
Because
a
the
na-
language.
I'll just let you know, just so that everyone knows what we're talking about. It's an enabling statute. So it says, if that was to pass today, dear cities and towns, if you want to amend your code, your property tax code to allow for this exemption, you may. You don't have to because you control your budgets. There are some cities and towns that might be interested in something like that because it improves, it might be a boost to residency, having their city employees live in the town that they're in. We were just talking, a lot of different towns across the state have different requirements. That's why I wanted to throw it out there to places that are not East Bay, just to have a conversation.
Well, maybe we should talk about this in the committee hearings, probably a better idea.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right. Moving on. Waste and disposal, I believe is back to you.
Yeah, so this is a
Thank
pretty
you.
simple one, palate cleanser of waste disposal. Just bringing up, we brought this up several years in a row, that the central landfill, the lifespan of the landfill is finite. We can see the end on the horizon, and everybody in the state needs to be working right now on what's going to happen after that landfill is full. The League of Cities and Towns hosted a visit to the central landfill a couple of weeks ago. We got a tour, we got a presentation from the leadership. Sounds like there's a lot of different potential opportunities that they're looking at to handle waste disposal in the future. But if we wait until the last minute, we're going to be in really big trouble if we end up having to truck waste to New Jersey or Pennsylvania or something like that. So just kind of trying to keep that on the radar. And something that had been discussed in the past, is the state going to go to a statewide pay-as-you-throw program? Or are we going to continue to do things the way we've always done them and have the same results that we've continued to have, which is that the costs keep going up and the landfill keeps getting closer to the end of its life?
What is it, 2038?
Something like that.
I mean, we always have proposals before us with legislation. One of the things that we've always tried to do is to minimize the cost per ton for municipalities, and that's always been a big bargaining chip between the House and the Senate in terms of trying to keep those costs down. One of the things we have to do is continue to provide education. And one of the things that I'm trying to find out now is that 2 years ago, I believe I passed legislation that would require our elementary schools and our middle schools to provide a program on a yearly basis regarding litter control, recycling, and recycling reuse, so we can start teaching our children the importance of not littering, recycling, and saving our landfills. And sometimes we pass these bills and we pass around the line and write evidence. And so I'm trying to get feedback from Ryan as we speak relative to that, as to what municipalities and what school systems are complying with that legislation and which ones aren't. Because, you know, it really details and dovetails into what the governor's trying to do here, so. Providing funding for anti-living and providing, the clean environment.
Well, I think the pay as you throw is really what's gonna change people's behavior. I mean, education works to a certain extent, but, you know, until people have to actually pay for what they throw away in reality. And I think that's why those programs actually work, but there's a big pushback because people don't like buying bags to throw their trash away. But it really does work. And I'm not sure what, I mean, I remember talking to somebody years ago about this down in Portsmouth, and it was the DPW director, and I said, well, you know, how did you get this passed? He said, well, 3 of the 5 council members were not running for election again, so they passed it. And so, I mean, I know that's how controversial it is, but it really does work because you pay per bag, and you're not going to throw just all kinds of trash in the barrel to go to the landfill. I mean, it does work.
That would just have to go statewide though. I mean, it's just,
Well, you can do
You
per
can do it
community.
can you do it?
Oh, yeah.
You go out on Market Street on trash
The
day.
question now becomes is, you know, getting back to, what do you get for your property taxes? You know, and how do you want to construct your town in terms of different things? I remember when I was the town council president, I said no one would ever pay for recreation. That was my thing to Pete Sepping, and I said, Pete Sepping, you could be the director, but I can assure you that not one child is going to pay for summer recreation. And now that's changed, so there's a community shift
Sure.
on different things.
Yeah.
And the community can structure their whole gamut based on whatever they want to spend and whatever, the taxpayers say that you can afford to spend. I mean, there's some people that say, hey, I don't have a child in the school system, why am I still paying for the school system? You know, so you could go down a rabbit hole when you start to do different things. So
Yep.
make sure you know where you're going when you want to propose these things.
Well, pay as you throw is certainly, you know, you're not gonna pay for it if you're not throwing it. You know, it's not like, oh, I don't have children, why should I pay for education?
You're not paying for your next door neighbor's
paying
trash,
for-
you know, because that's what
Yeah.
happens.
Like I'm saying is that you'd have better success if you went on an individual community than you would statewide.
Okay,
Probably, right?
duly noted. On to policing.
Policing is just a carry forward from last year, which was, you know, my personal opinion is that we should be supporting the amendments to the law enforcement officers Bill of Rights that have been proposed by the Police Chiefs Association. My opinion is the Police Chiefs Association has done a good job evaluating that piece of legislation and coming up with reasonable changes. that-
As long as they're working in concert with the other side also, the FOP and the IBPO.
I don't see that as the other side,
Well,
personally.
but those are the police that it's dealing with. I mean, I understand that the public has a hard time sometimes wrapping their head around the law enforcement police officers Bill of Rights. But I would not be personally supportive of something that was just completely one-sided. I understand that these police chiefs may have come up through the ranks, but it has to be fair and reasonable and balanced. It cannot be just one-sided. And the one thing that I would never support is removing the 3 members of the police department. Members, no civilian should ever sit on any board that oversees a police officer being either disciplined or whatever the process may be. Because if that's the case, then civilians can go on the review board for attorneys, and then civilians can go on the review board for doctors, which that's not the process. They're reviewed by their peers. So I'm supportive of an amendment, but it needs to be fair and equitable and balanced. I don't know what the state, I mean, I don't know where you guys are at the State House on these amendments, the Police Officers Bill of Rights. I know you get all sorts of different support from both sides up at the State House, but I don't recall when the last time a hearing was held on revising the Police Officers Bill of Rights.
I think the last hearing that was held was 21.
Okay.
If I remember right. And there's an effort to address or modernize the police officers' Bill of Rights. I'm not hearing too many people talk about straight up repeal, which was something that was in the wind a while ago. And while I appreciate that police officers, line police officers, on the ground police officers, and the chiefs all have concerns about what happens with any reform, I think it's certainly important that the impetus for this around the State House is coming from communities of color. And as we've seen in the past few days, that needs to be paid attention to, which is what I'm doing.
But that same broad brush can't be painted on what happens in Minnesota or Tennessee applied to what happens in Rhode Island or even the town of Warren, because they're not the same. They're just not the same.
There are 3 officers in the state of Rhode Island, 4 up until a couple of days ago, to my knowledge, who are under criminal charges for excessive force. It happens here.
Oh, no,
And all
not
I'm
saying
saying
it
is
doesn't
that
happen. I'm just,
we're
the
gonna-
process is different. Our process is different.
Our
And I always tell
process is
people, allow the process to play out.
we are gonna have, if someone puts a bill in, and there's not a bill in now, but if someone puts a bill in, it'll be subject to a legislative process, and everyone will have their say for sure.
Well, I mean, Greg Williams put one in last year relative to accountability, and, you know, that's a hearing and. It's, you know, on a yearly basis, we get, 2,600 bills
Sure.
in.
Yep.
You know, and probably 100 or so relate to police and fire. And so you have to see which ones come up. And go through the process.
Yeah,
I mean,
understand.
we have a committee process that we.
Allow the
you know,
process to play out.
Please keep in mind that Jason and I don't read every 2,400 bills.
Nobody would ever expect you to.
That is submitted on a yearly basis. I mean, they're assigned to committee. And so Jason has the preview, I guess, of being maybe on judicial or something that reviews those bills. I'm more on the finance committee, so I'll review those bills. But for me to review judiciary wouldn't really take place.
No, understand.
It comes from on high if it passes that particular committee to be on the floor.
Sure.
But Steve, I do think that the general feeling around the State House is that it's a reform, not a repeal sort of thing right now.
Understand. Yeah. That's all I have. Yeah. Does anybody else? No? Okay.
I just keep hearing the one thing that the thread that goes through everything is it's different in each community. And I don't know if you've picked that up, but everything that we're pretty much saying, I'm hearing when it kind of suits the position, we hear that other community wouldn't think this way, or this community would think. Everybody's community is looking out for their own best interest.
Sure. That's the challenge of drawing up legislation that applies
Yeah.
statewide.
Right, I mean, it's just an interesting thing when
Yeah.
we look at what our community is fighting for or against. It can be completely opposite in another community.
Very good. So we're on to taxation.
Yes, and taxation, I'm sure we could talk all day about taxation, but there are 2 primary things that I wanted to bring up. One was, last year there was legislation passed that, in my interpretation, grants preferential tax treatment to commercial scale ground mounted solar arrays that are constructed on farm, forest, and open space. So what they did was, what the legislature did was say that if someone installs a commercial grade solar array on something that's currently taxed as open space, then once that array has been installed, the municipality can no longer change the land use classification for tax purposes, and it has to continue to be taxed as open space or as a farm or as a forest. Whereas any other land use, when you change the use of that land, the classification for tax purposes also changes and you pay the tax rate that anyone in that classification would pay. So I think the intention was to incentivize solar array development, but the unintended consequence is now you're incentivizing construction of these arrays on this farm, forest, and open space in a way that you're not incentivizing construction on brownfield properties or industrial properties or commercial properties or parking lots, or these places where I think everyone agrees is probably a preferential location. Instead, we're incentivizing clear cutting forest space, eliminating farmland, eliminating open space to create the solar farm.
And not even taxing them
And
as
not
an
taxing.
industrial use.
Correct. So the recommendation is to fix that legislation somehow to even out that tax treatment, not so the towns can collect more taxes necessarily, but so that the incentive isn't there to take away the farm, forest, and open space property for that use when it's more beneficial to put those uses on already developed property.
I think you're gonna see this year, and in fact, there's like a informational session tomorrow morning, which unfortunately I can't go to, but I think you will see something this year that will kind of uniform solar siting policy, a bill to make solar siting policy uniform that has really struggled in the last 3-4 years because there's so many competing interests that come to it. So I don't know if we're gonna, we just passed this. I don't know if you're gonna see a repeal, but I think you'll see a little more common sense and uniformity about where people can put those things.
And then the second bullet, it in a way ties to the affordable and the housing production issue. It's on the tax cap. Rhode Island general law limits the municipal tax base growth to 4% annually. I mean, a lot of people think like the tax rate is capped at 4%, but it has nothing to do with the rate. It has to do with the tax base, the levy. And there are a couple of exemptions that are outlined in general law, but it does not give any exemptions for new housing or commercial developments. Massachusetts does give exemptions for new housing of a certain scale and type, and I don't know all the details. But it seems that if you have a significant amount of housing development in a single year or at a short period of time, that there should be some consideration of that when the town's tax levy is calculated.
So would that be impacted if, say, for example, Tourister were to go condo, how that would impact us?
It would depend because those are existing units, so it would depend on how the exemptions were written. I think typically it applies to new construction. So if you had, instead of, if Tourister wasn't there and you had a 360 unit apartment building, then what happens in Massachusetts is that that gets phased in over time into the levy. So that it creates a little bit more of an incentive to allow that development, but also it creates a better way of calculating from a tax assessment standpoint.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, there's finally a real proposal on the table in Barrington to get at the Zion property. And I know there's some concerns over there that if the Zion property, which has like an enormous number of residential units, which would be added to the town's roster, if that went forward, then there would be this like couple of years with tax policy where it's like the snake with the egg, right? Because you're trying to absorb all this, but you can't raise enough money to provide the services and that sort of thing. So I think that's a sharp idea.
And it always helps when Massachusetts has something similar on the books that you can look at the pluses and minuses of how it's been used. So that was it for me on taxation.
Covered.
Wow.
Onto your miscellaneous.
I can zip through miscellaneous really fast. The first two are about Medicaid, and I think I've learned a lot actually from Senator Miller. I'm on a committee with Senator Miller, and I've learned a lot from him. One of the things is about increasing Medicaid reimbursement rates. Tommy Joyce at the East Bay Recovery Center can tell you the last time that the provider rates were adjusted for EMS, transportation, substance use disorder, and mental health treatment providers. It's been a really long time. And every time this issue comes up, I've been told this is a legislative issue. It has to go to the legislature. So just people don't think Medicaid rates directly affect the town, but through our EMS services, it definitely does affect the town greatly. And associated with that is the Medicaid transition. Because of COVID, Medicaid recipients were assumed to be eligible throughout the pandemic. The federal government has now ended that. So over the next 14 months, everyone who's on Medicaid is going to have to requalify, and people who no longer qualify are going to no longer be on Medicaid. I believe last year Senator Miller proposed offering a 90-day transition period between Medicaid and whenever that person gets on private insurance, or give them the 90 days to figure out how to transition out. I think this year he said he was going to introduce a bill to grant a 60-day transition period. But I think that's definitely worth considering, especially, again, it affects us in our EMS billing. If we transport someone who is uninsured, we're not going to get reimbursed, most likely, for any of that cost. Whereas if they can continue on Medicaid until such time that they can transition onto a private insurer, then it ensures that we get paid for the medical services that we provide, in addition to everybody else in the healthcare system.
Fair
Well,
enough.
How successful are people transitioning over to private insurance?
This
You
is
know?
just starting in February 1st is when they start actually with the transition process.
So we don't know.
We don't know. They're batching people, so they're going to do batches of people every month for the next 14 months. I think they're struggling just logistically how they're going to do it, but the federal government is requiring it, so it has to be done. but-
Certification.
Right, but what we have jurisdiction over on the local side is allowing that transition period for people to go out and find private insurance on the marketplace.
So you can extend it even though the feds are requiring that transition to go faster? Or
I believe, and this again, it's a legislative issue.
There's a fair amount of close coordination between state authorities and federal authorities when it comes to Medicaid spending. So I have no doubt that where there's room for leeway, they'll give us leeway. But you're right. I mean, they're just trying to get, the federal government made this basically with one hand, just wiped away a lot of these requirements around Medicaid just to make sure that people had medical care during COVID. And they're just, I believe they're trying to get back to the extent you can call anything in Medicaid world normal.
Yeah. Mhm.
Keep going, you're on a roll.
Sure. Disability pension parity is something that has come up with the League of Cities and Towns. There have been reforms made in disability pensions on the state level. State employees who can continue to work are treated one way, but municipal and public safety employees are treated another way. So I won't get too far into the weeds, but the request is that when there's reform made to disability pensions, that the municipal employees and the state employees are treated the same, basically. And I can give you specific citations if you're interested. And they always use us as the poster child for these things with the league, with disability pensions. Unfortunately, they always say, because of what happened in Warren,
Well, so
we don't want that to happen.
Is there someone spearheading?
I will look.
So it's my understanding that if you're a state employee and you're on a disability pension, if you decide to go back to work, everything you earn beyond your pension comes off your pension. Is that what you're trying to revise?
No, this is about the percentage and the ability to continue working while receiving a disability pension. The percentage that you receive, if you can continue to work in some capacity while receiving a disability pension, the percentage that you receive is different whether you're a state employee or a municipal employee.
Okay. So is it something that wants to target like police and fire?
Not necessarily.
All right, so understand that if a fire,
Yeah, IOD is different. IOD is totally separate.
yeah, if a firefighter is permanently partially disabled from performing their duty as a firefighter, but they can go work as a data processor. Are you wanting to reduce that person's disability pension?
Wanting it to be the same, whether
You work for a town or you work for the
Work for the
state.
state,
Right now,
okay.
they're two different.
Yeah.
So why should?
Because isn't it
matter?
the 66 and 2/3?
it's 66 and 2/3. If you're a state employee, it's 50. So if you're a clerk in town hall and you have a disability pension, you go back to work, you collect 66 and 2/3. If you're an employee in the state house and you have the same job and you get 50.
Oh, they're not at 66 and 2/3.
No.
I thought everybody was at 62. So
No.
it used to be, was that created when you had pension reform? Because everybody used to be at 66 and 2/3,
It
unless
was-
you were in a private pension.
It was passed just a couple years ago. It was
Okay.
a separate bill that passed a couple years ago.
I'm out of the loop. I've been retired. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Yeah, because I had a little question mark down by that. I was like,
And I have a slam dunk for the next one. H,
We were talking about it.
H5230,
Oh, no, that, oh.
providing for local regulation of houseboats, including waterborne hotels and restaurants. In case you're wondering, we do have a local ordinance on houseboats in the town of Warren, and this would leave no question that that's a valid ordinance. Basically, this was brought to me by our our harbor master. He said it's been a big topic in Newport and that there have been questions about who has jurisdiction over floating dwellings and businesses.
Is there a Senate companion on this, or,
I don't think so.
I should contact us?
The right person, yeah, she's got it. I would send her.
Or you have to- Senate always like, see Kate's,
So you said Ed brought this to you
Yes,
because
he is in favor of the bill to allow the town to legitimize the town's regulatory control over houseboats.
We already,
houseboats.
we already have regulatory control over our
But-
mooring fields and docks.
it seems
But
You want
there-
to take that away from us?
No, this would make sure that there's no question, because in other communities, it's been raised. There's a question of the town's ability to regulate.
So what
It,
do you
it was
say-
explained, to me that perhaps down in Newport, if you have a floating dock houseboat or something, and maybe you want to Airbnb it, and Newport, for example, and Newport wants to exert some control over it, that maybe the way the law is written, it's not crystal clear as to who has that authority over the floating structure. Is it Newport, or is it state, or is it DEM, or is it CRMC? And I think the thrust of the bill is to make it crystal clear it's the municipalities. Did I get that right?
Yeah, we have it in our harbor management,
What, I mean, you can have it written. there,
right, but evidently it's not
Right.
supported by state law.
This would make it clear,
Can't wait to have that here.
So
yes.
we, did you speak houseboat restaurants?
Who knows? Anything can happen.
Well,
That's
but
right.
you,
I think it's just, again, it's Joe's earlier point, I think it's just making it clear that local municipalities should have control over the destiny of their municipality, and this is just another, whether it's a floating houseboat or a house, it's still residents. of the
I mean, there are some marinas where you can live on your boat and there are others that you can't. So I guess now the state law is a gray area on how these marinas can enforce that, or municipalities.
I don't know the genesis of the bill. I mean, I'm sure it came out of some local controversy, or somebody wanted to do something and the town was like, you
Couldn't.
can't. And then the person was like, well, yes, I can. So I don't know, but certainly worth looking into. And clearly, the town manager supports it, right? Right.
I don't like gray areas.
And may I take the last one?
Oh, of course you do.
So Mr. Waters came up here, it looks like it was on the agenda, 5118, that bill I put in about the teachers and whatnot. Listen, I get the optics on something like this.
Wait a minute, this is what he was talking
This
about.
is what he was talking.
He left.
Oh, no.
I don't think he knew it was on the list.
maybe,
You had it.
Yeah,
And
but I want to say for the record, I totally get why at first blush, this kind of thing is like, what?
but if it's
what the heck
enabling
you doing?
legislation,
It's enabling,
Then-
but also
Yeah.
more to the point.
Yeah.
I'm, now maybe there's no solution to this, but my heart goes out to a person who is, established in their community or town, and then they suffer some sort of adverse financial condition, which may make them have to pick up stakes and move along because the property taxes are too high. I mean, that seems wrong to me. So I want to see if there's a potential solution. I don't know if there is, but this is how you start a conversation with Jones.
that's fine.
I have one more thing if I can add.
Absolutely.
How would you guys support a request for trees to be put on Child Street. Yeah, back when we did Child Street, and Mr. Fila can remember, we had other issues that were more important at the time, like finishing the street and actually dealing with the irregularities that were in that project. And at the time, I think, Senator, we kind of said, we're gonna pick our fights and didn't, there were no trees, so.
I am pro tree.
Okay, so we'll send you a request for some state funding for trees. There are like the only ones that are on market, Child Street were the ones that we had planted within like maybe up to Railroad Avenue. I don't even think they go down that far. To Railroad Ave, right? That's about like, that's where they stopped. So we had a big street project done and
I will say this, because I just went to the training. I think that's something you can put in the tip, right?
Yes, if you were asked.
Well, you guys,
But
you guys certainly, there is a mechanism for the localities. Because each locality is different. To put in their requests for additions to the tip through the planner or the planning board. I forget the actual nuts and bolts of it, but it's there and you can get something like this added to the tip.
So in the past, there was a process where every certain number of years, the tip would be opened up for public comment for the towns. Municipalities would be sent the existing projects and they'd be asked to rank them in order of priority, and then they'd be asked to do new projects. There's a form that was accompanied it. I think the last time it came out was 2018, maybe 2017.
when did we testify?
That was 2016. So I've asked repeatedly when that process is going to happen again, because it's supposed to happen, I believe, every 2 or 3 years, and it hasn't happened since then, and I've been told several times.
I have to call DOT tomorrow and I will call them about this too.
If there's a process, I'd love to know about it, because we have a backlog, we can send projects all day.
And we really wouldn't want this to compete with pedestrian and or how do you say, like actual infrastructure?
Different pots of money.
Yeah, I was hoping for beautification. The last thing I would want to do is not get south end of Warren finished in my lifetime, because that tip started in 2000 and now it's, I think, 2028.
when it comes to,
The state is gonna start that program off, and where DOT meets with the municipalities as to what's on the tip program, and what is their priorities are.
Yes, and it used to be the council would have a hearing, we would review the projects, you prioritize it, we send it back to DOT.
And I was kind of glad that they just asked it, because we used to go and participate all the time and nothing happened. So when they just got rid of it, at least we knew what we were getting then.
I know the governor's budget has around $10 million more for municipalities for different projects, whether they be sidewalks or roads on municipal properties, so to speak.
And there's through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there's cash for all kinds of various things. DOT is like, wait, look at the trail. They finally paved the trail. Look at 146. They finally paid for 146 because of the pavement money in the infrastructure bill. So now might be the time. I will.
Construction will be beginning in the springtime, and unfortunately, the completion date is like October of 2025 or something like that. So,
You mean the bike path bridges?
yes.
great, with the trees though, absolutely, let's get trees on Child Street, but let's also bake into that long-term care and keeping, because the planting of the trees is wonderful, but watering them, maintaining them and whatnot, and if it's on a state street, they have to be maintained and upkept.
Well, we
and
can
not-
even have an adoption, local adoption
Or-
program works. But what we need primarily is permission to cut the sidewalk. One, then permission, like we have trees out here. That the tree well is empty. And we've petitioned the state forever. And they haven't come back and because they're state trees. So maybe maybe you can do this as well. Introduce a law that allows local municipalities to deal with the trees in cooperation with DOT, not DOT doesn't. We could have planted trees that we grew. The tree farm never got utilized and they're too big to move now. That's how interested we were
If
in
you have
trees.
your lawyers draft up something and give it to me with a resolution, put it right in.
I will. You'll have it next month.
But Carrie, to your point, the tree warden, Steve, says
Yeah.
don't plant another tree until you get a meeting.
We'll include that in the resolution.
Well, we're not going to about that.
What?
We're not
Kate, do you
gonna
have anything
listen about
else?
That, we're gonna plant trees,
No?
because the best time we planted trees 10 years ago. We'll figure out how to maintain them once we have them in the ground.
I will say this, if anyone's still tuned in, thank you so much for inviting us. I find these things, these conversations as stimulating and sometimes as hard as they are to be invaluable because it really helps when we're up there, particularly in the votorama that comes in the last few days, which is just like bills and bills and bills and bills. I can always go back to my notes and be like, town didn't like that. Or yeah, the town likes it.
Before I ask for an adjournment, I want to thank both Senator Feeling and Senator Knight for coming. We appreciate everything you've done for the town of Warren. I also wanted to thank the manager for putting this together and our clerks that are here. Thank you, and the members of the public. If there's nothing else, I believe our message has been loud and clear. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Just to echo the comments by Rep. Knight, these are always very informative type sessions, but keep in mind that, as I mentioned all the time, there's gonna be 2,400 bills that are gonna be submitted. And we've probably only seen 100 of them, if that.
We haven't seen any.
You know,
We have no committees yet.
well, I know that probably about 100 has been on the docket.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
trying to refer to a few of these bills that have been already submitted and logged in. So please let us know through the town manager what types of bills impact you, especially those, as I say all the time, that impact our volunteer fire department or may impact our municipality and those type of things. That we can be aware of.
Very well. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?